to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations. The space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. Everyone's got an interesting journey into crafting their product careers. The best part is to embrace all of our facets and dimensions and see how to bring them all into one picture. And over time, that translates to exploring habits that help us stay in those dimensions and keep learning, not just from our own work, but also from networks around us. So, how do you channelize these nonlinear paths, find rituals, and focus on growth while still building products? With me today on the show is Lane Shackleton, the CPO of Coda, a favorite person from a favorite product. Lane previously led product teams at YouTube and Google and brings in a set of unique work experiences from before. Lane works with so many creators across the globe and he loves to talk about empathy, goal setting, and many more stories. Hey, Lane, thank you so much for being here. It's such a great start to 2024 for me and for the listeners that I see.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here. Excited to chat.
Awesome. So let's dive into one of the questions that I've always been curious about you because ever since I probably read about your background, a mountain climbing guide in Alaska turned into an environmental consultant in Australia, the co founder of Home Team Wines in California, and over the last many years, a tech product lead. You've built a very intriguing and a non-linear path into a tech career. So, how does all of this make up who Lane is?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love about tech in general is that it attracts people who enjoy this kind of nonlinearity. And so I don't think I'm so unique in having a nonlinear path, but I do think that, um, you know, we're all a product of these experiences and it kind of creates the lens by which we view the world. In my career, I feel like I've been just super fortunate at every turn, lots of kind of divergent experiences. In the beginning, working in environmental consulting was in Australia was just a very different mindset,
Hmm.
bit of a slower pace. Work was secondary to surfing and other things, and then starting a wine business, we were like 23 years old. We made a million mistakes. People tried to rip us off by selling bad wine to us, like all kinds of kind of crazy stories. And and I think through each of these, like, learned a slightly different thing. I feel like through the wine business, you learn a lot about branding,
Mm.
just because it's such a kind of commodity space that you have to create something special about a wine. And then, mountain guiding, I think, is like a really different beast altogether. I feel like I learned a ton about leadership and just doing kind of hard things, and also, taking other people through those experiences. Lots of little rituals in mountain guiding that become really important. So there's definitely like a thread throughout
Mm.
my career, and something that I'm, continue to be very interested in. Yeah.
I like the way you're stringing all of these experiences together. And you rightly brought the point about mindset, which I also found is a common thing that brought these stories together, either with respect to, guiding people on the Alaskan mountains or trying to set up your own branding and sell wines. A lot of it still relates back to how do you create a very unique experience. And for that, I think it's a lot to do with the mindset. So I would love to go deeper on that. But climbing, skiing, surfacing, and also like right now running software, a lot of these are pursuits that have a lot of endurance in each of these because it is tough, it is challenging. And like you said, people can just, rip off the brand or try to act in a very crazy way. So what is your deeper connection with endurance as such?
Yeah, I mean, it's the family motto. So the family motto of the Shackleton family is "By endurance we conquer." And I don't know, I've always had like a weird. I think it's because I grew up with these stories, like the stories of Sir
Mhm.
and Shackleton, and hearing this word from a very early age. I've definitely always had like a connection to it. And in full disclosure, like I had very average endurance as a climber. So it was definitely I had to have the mindset that, I guess in those days I took a lot of inspiration from marathon runners. I used to read biographies of marathon runners, and one quote in particular really stuck out to me. I think it's like I can't remember. It's the woman who is one of the most accomplished marathon runners in the world. And she has this phrase that is essentially learn to love the pain. And I think
Mm.
that that was like, for me in those times, like doing kind of more endurancey things, that I used to repeat that line to myself, all the time, climbing, etc. And I think it's like a really high bar. Think about that. Like not just endure the pain, if you're a really accomplished marathon runner, which I could never do, but love it. Like actually love the process of getting better,
Mm.
of, you know, going through hard things. And I think that in some ways that has also been a fairly consistent theme. I think doing hard things in software, building companies takes endurance. It takes like in some ways you have to wake up and know that there are going to be 10 more problems than when you went to sleep, and you kind of have to just like keep going and push through it. And so I think
Mm.
that I definitely have a fondness for the family motto, "By endurance we conquer," and a fondness for that word. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, by this time, you should know that I purposely brought in endurance to get that family motto off. But yeah, second that attitude that you brought in with respect to taking joy in the pain, because I feel that a lot of this is not like trying to not aimlessly wander, but trying to take through the process, try to say that, okay, I might not get to the outcome that I want, but that doesn't mean that I shouldn't enjoy the journey. And that doesn't mean that I should take a very kind of a negative approach to what I'm doing. So that part of enduring pain is more important than the actual pain in that context. And this comes back to a lot of what we do in product building as well. I mean, there are like challenges, like you mentioned, with respect to our own product. And, one day you wake up, you have like 10 competitors out there, like people trying to build the same thing that you do. And everybody's trying to compete in a very similar market. And I think like everybody takes that hint at endurance. Like everybody tries to say, oh, we play the long game and we are in it for long and, we'd love to serve our customers. But the real part of getting through the journey is how much of the process do you differentiate with? Like, what do you do differently that your customers in turn then have a deep connection with? And I think that
Mm.
part of endurance would really make any particular brand and again, an individual who's building the brand stand out because endurance also slowly becomes like a very competing game with people.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think, if you look at the best companies, the best founders, the best product people, I think the myth of like overnight success has definitely been debunked. The average company takes 10 years to go public, things like that. Even the cases that are super successful. So I think, day in and day out, learning to love those problems as they arise and really expecting them to arise, like expecting that that is going to be the case. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people have frustrating years or careers sometimes when they're surprised that there's a big
Mm.
problem that arises. It's like, no, that's the game you're in. And so I think,
Yeah.
yeah, the people that can endure that and not just endure it, but kind of, to the marathon mantra, like learn to love it, then I think it's just
Mm.
a different game altogether.
Yeah, totally. I'm curious because we're digging more deeper into endurance. Is there like the other angle to endurance that you've seen? Because I think once people start understanding, oh, so it means I have to take joy in the pain, or it means I just have to accept pain. Is there like another extreme part of it where you're just probably you don't know, you just probably succumb to the pain, or you're just getting numb with the pain, and you really don't take the next step. Is there like the other extreme that you've seen, which you can try to juxtapose with what you see in? teams or products, or just as such an extreme endurance case? Have you seen such examples?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's maybe I'll go back to mountain climbing or guiding for a second. I mean,
Hmm.
you want to know when to go down. Like I guess is the simplest way to put it. If you're, climbing a mountain and you're in the midst of really crappy weather and
Mm,
your partner's tired and you're at a calorie deficit or something like that, you know, you want to live another day, you want to climb another day. And so like the wisest thing in those cases are to go down. And, the old time climbers I always took a lot of inspiration from because they were, they didn't let their ego get in the way of that. And I think that was, a lesson that I took from a bunch of older guys at that time. And I think that, building software, leading teams is no different. Like you kind of have to do a very objective assessment of when things aren't working and adapt. And I think that,
mm,
I think we're all like used to hearing things like they did a big pivot or like they made this very large change. I think oftentimes iterative, like small changes, whether that's, designing a organization or whether that's designing a product, will often get you kind of unstuck or out of those, more painful situations that you don't want to be in.
right. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of this would take like a strong foothold with respect to staying humble, like somewhere letting go of that ego and somewhere like trying to understand, hey, this is not going to steer forward. So let me like just take a better decision, or let me just try to analyze what's the next step. And a lot of that I, hear from what I get from your experiences is to also know that you have your roots back in the humility. And as much as you know you're great at what you do, it comes back to endurance, but with a sense of humility.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I've been fortunate to have a bunch of leaders around me throughout my career who are both highly proficient, but also low ego. And I think that, I've learned a lot from those people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great combination to learn from, and also like as colleagues have and together build with. So that's a great
Yeah.
point. Cool. We're talking about mental models and in sort of like having that kind of a mental preparation. And to an extent, it reminds me of Timothy Galloway's books, especially on the inner game of a different sport. And to begin with the tennis golf series that he wrote. And I used to love his take because he always brought in not just the sport from a very raw angle, but he always brought in that the game and the life combination together. And a lot of what we're talking now is also very similar. Like you try to excel at what you do with product building or with team building, and also with very endurance based sport or in terms of any activity that you do. It's a lot to do with your performance being tied to how mentally prepared you are. So as an athlete yourself and having served in these different facets, how do you draw parallels to product work? And because that's largely a mindful journey, right? A lot of it. And now these days, PMs talk a lot about being mindful, trying to have a very different mindset to what they do. So, what's your experience been like in this?
Yeah. Yeah. Timothy Galway's book, The Inner Game of Tennis, is a great book. I recommend to a lot of different people. And it's not just, I think the impression is it's just about tennis. And I think
It's not.
I first learned about this book actually in an Alan Kay talk about simplicity. And he sort of gave his perspective on it. And immediately I picked it up. And
Mm,
this was like years before, I guess during the pandemic, I got really into tennis. And this was years before that. And so worlds kind of collided. But anyway, I think the thing I take away from this is like, in some ways, I guess two things. One is I think leaders and product people should practice like pro athletes or like as close as you can, or like a college athlete. So if you go look at
mm,
how Michael Phelps trains for the Olympics or how Serena Williams trained in tennis. Like it's incredible if you look at how many hours a day they're putting in, the intentionality of every single motion that they're doing throughout that training regimen, how they're preparing mentally for that. And I think that oftentimes, software teams or leaders think that they can just like show up and just like kind of wing it. And you know, I think there are lots of opportunities to practice the same way that with the same kind of intentionality that a pro athlete or a college athlete would do. The second thing, and I think this is maybe more to the point of the book, the book talks about these kind of two mindsets or two minds. And in sports, I think, if you take tennis or surfing or something like that, the
Mhm.
environment is so dynamic, right? It's like so fast moving that you really can't succeed if you're simultaneously like talking to yourself and, and trying to react to like 100 mile an hour serve, or like trying to react to like a wave, sort of cresting in a certain way and trying to like get under, and so I think that, the parallel maybe in like software and product teams, it may be like the voice in your head when you're saying, I'm not, I shouldn't be here. I'm not good enough, or, whatever voice is in your head, I think comes up for a lot of people, especially,
Mm.
it's often gets called imposter syndrome. Like, I'm in a meeting with a bunch of accomplished people and I don't feel like I'm, worthy of this group or whatever. And I think as much as you can collapse and quiet that voice and just be like present as much as possible, everything gets easier, or if you think about it the other way, like if you're playing tennis and someone's has a great 100 mile an hour serve and you're thinking, are they going to go this way? Are they going to go this way? Or is it going to come down the middle? That overthinking will often lead you to just, totally miss, or, not be able to return the serve. And so I think that insofar as it's possible, I think that's what's powerful about mindfulness in general is that, the future and the past are, in their right place and you're centered with the present moment. And I think it's quite hard. I feel like 20 years of meditation practice. I feel like I'm finally starting to get some of this, but yeah, that's a bit of a random answer. I guess one other thing that it makes me think about is just I'm a big believer that, a lot of this is about noticing. It's about noticing your own thoughts. It's about noticing what a customer wants. It's about noticing little nuggets. And so I think
Yeah.
some of my favorite people to work with and something that I try to do is be like world class at noticing things. It seems
Mm.
like so silly and small, but you know, I think that whether it's noticing that, wow, there is like a lot of self talk happening before this meeting. Like, what's going on? Like, let me unpack
Yeah.
that. Or, whether it's noticing, hey, that customer said something that was really interesting and nobody else picked up
Mm.
on it. But there's this underlying need from what they said. Like that's what oftentimes a great product builder, you'll hear that. I found this insight. Is that, can we verify that? Can we understand that a little bit more?
Mm.
Can we get some data on that kind of question? So I think a lot of this in many ways comes back to your ability to train yourself to notice things.
Yeah. Great. The last bit of it, I can totally relate to it because that's exactly what I was trying to get to the crux in terms of being able to observe things around you. Because the first time I also got to know about the concepts of two different selves and two different voices, I was blown away because that's exactly what happens with most people, especially folks who love doing things, who probably like are just ready and up to take the world. But then at the same time, they're also highly self-critical. They're also like highly questioning every second thought that comes in their mind. And then there's this battle of two different worlds inside their mind.
Yes.
So it's kind of nice in some sense to catch yourself and like try to say, hey, like something is really happening and now let me like try to see if there's something I can decipher out of this. And to me, like how you mentioned the parallels with product people going through the imposter. The other extreme of what I saw with the very similar situation is constantly second guessing what you would want to put out.
Mhm.
Like in terms of creators or product builders, is always like
Yeah.
trying to question: Is this like a right decision? Like, do I really have to go put this out? Like, have I gotten all the things that's required for the scope? Like constantly like trying to go ahead and like try to get to that sense of perfection, or like try to
Yeah.
get at that sense of not feeling very complete about what they do. And that I know, and that's also coming from a place of self discovery, because I've been there on the similar planes. So it's also like trying to see, hey, like something's happening clearly, and then I see myself like, no, this is just like stopping me from shipping things. And I've actually found that with a lot of creators and builders as well. So
Yeah.
the other extreme, as you were just explaining to me about feeling not enough, was also the part about feeling not complete and like not really
Mhm.
putting things out only because you're constantly second guessing.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely experienced that in a multitude of ways throughout my career. I think interestingly, I mean, maybe you feel the same parallel with the podcast that you're doing, but for me, starting a newsletter last year, like starting to write and put thoughts out, I felt
Mm.
like I could easily spend another 10 hours on every post. And at some point, you like have to hit the publish button. And I think that, having people around you that will hold you accountable to hitting the publish button and is helpful. I think, maybe to your point as well, discarding the notion that everything that you make is going to be perfect the first time, I think is,
Yeah.
very applicable. Like it's intuitive for software teams. It's like, oh, we're going to like ship the V1 and then we're going to ship the V2 and then
Mm.
like we're going to improve and iterate and stuff like that. It's a little bit less so if you're like I'm not really a creator, but like just this little experience writing more publicly, you definitely
Mhm.
feel that of like, is it okay to like ship this idea yet? Like, is it
Mm.
ready? Did I like explain it clearly enough? Blah, blah, blah. And I've found that the act of actually shipping it just is what makes helps you learn, which is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah,
Actually
definitely.
wrote a principle about that. Just
Mm.
like the principle of learn by making, not talking. I think, a lot of my favorite people who are like kind of creators and things like that, they just have
Yeah.
this like real propensity to ship. And like they just the way that they learn about their audience is by making new things and like
Mm.
following the direction that takes them in. And none of those people are talking more than they're making. And I think that that's like very similar
Mm.
for for software teams. Like you have to prototype, you have to put things in front of customers, and
Yeah.
that had a big influence on my career. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great practice, and something more like a principle that one can adopt and like show and don't tell and don't talk a lot, but try to visualize and ship things.
Yeah.
And there's also some sense of liberation you get with putting your ideas out. And you're right, like that's the same thing that
Yeah.
I have with podcasting as well. And earlier, and even now, when I get time, I dig onto articles. I like try to write down essays of my random musings and thoughts
Mhm.
of what I learned with product or what I learned with building things out, like just trying to explore ideas. And it's definitely a sense of liberation, because even before you try to ship it out to the audience, there's that whole energy about trying to get whatever was running through your mind onto the paper or onto the canvas. And
Mm.
then you're like, hey, like that's the first step and that's done. And now I could, probably like stop those voices and like try to put out to the audience and see if this is going to be
Yeah.
resonating. And it's okay if it's not going to be resonating with like the largest group, but you'd still find like a set of
Yeah.
people who think in very similar ways. And largely I like your product rituals newsletter for that reason. When you go to the comment section, you like have people commenting about, hey, like that's a great thing, and this is something we've followed in our company as well. And it's kind of
Yeah.
nice to have the conversation built with people. So which is why I kind of like come back to shipping things, and both from like a team and a product perspective, and also from an individual and idea perspective.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean that was part of the impetus for starting that newsletter is like being genuinely very curious about how other people do things. And so like oftentimes I'll end those with a question of like, how do you do this?
Yeah.
And then sometimes people respond publicly and a lot of times people respond just to me. And it's like so fascinating to hear people's really thoughtful rituals and practices. So I that's a part of the of writing publicly that I've really loved.
Mm. Yeah, that's awesome. And here's to doing more of that. And now we're talking about the rituals part, which I, from what I've seen in a couple of your experiences, is all about people, and as much as it is about technology and product. So, what's your earliest memory of noticing something as a good practice or a ritual? And how did you even come up with this term called ritual and wanting to sort of create a narrative around it?
Yeah, the story of really diving into that term more formally was
Mm.
during the pandemic. Shashir and I and a couple other people from Coda started running these dinners, and the basic idea was look, we're all in our houses, we can't go anywhere,
Mm.
and so we would jump on Zoom with people really from all over the world. And the premise was very simple. It was just like, just bring like one interesting ritual from your team. And like,
Mm.
we're not like recording, this is a small group. Let's just like hear about what how your team runs, something unique or interesting.
Mm.
And that, we kind of started it as a little experiment to figure out like, is this interesting? And we're immediately like blown away by the quality of what people said and the passion with which they said it. And, you know, at that point, I think we were like, wow, like not only are we getting a ton out of this, but, if we take some of these rituals and, share them more broadly or help these people share them, then, perhaps that helps a lot of other people. And so that, sort of snowballed and Shashir started writing all these down in a book. And I started kind of cataloging a few of the product D ones in the newsletter. And
Mm.
so that's sort of how it started. I think, there's a few memorable ones from those early dinners. One of the earliest ones that we had was with Tomer London, who's one of the founders of Gusto. And
Mm.
he talked about one of their rituals they call offer parties. I don't know if they still do this, but the basic idea is like this is when the market was like highly competitive for talent. Every company was going through hyper growth. And so like trying to land an offer was really challenging. And so they came up with this ritual where they would get everybody who was on your interview panel to come to your offer meeting. Like typically, I think everyone knows this, but typically like you get an offer, it's a recruiter or like someone from the people team saying like, here's your offer. Team's really excited about you. And in Gusto's case, Tomer sort of passionately told the story of how they kind of turned that on its head and they brought everybody from
Mm.
your interview panel and they all went around. Every person went around and said, this is something that I noticed about you. This is the reason that I'm excited
Mm.
for you to join the team.
That's so good.
Now, can you imagine like how like I think it's like a perfect little example of a ritual. If you notice what's going on, like status quo version of that is really boring and like makes as a human being makes you feel so average, whatever.
Yeah.
The slightly tuned up intentional version of it, offer parties, is it's like 180 degrees better. It's like different.
Yeah.
You must leave that call. I mean, I've never been on one, but I just heard about it. You probably leave that call going, "Oh my gosh, like I have to join this
Yeah.
company." Like, you know what I mean? And so I think that early examples like that kind of cued me into the idea that you can take a status quo ritual and
Mm,
like flip it on its head just with a little thought, just with like a little fixed upfront
mm,
thought of like how we're going to do this differently than everybody else. Another one, I guess, from those early days that I've written about, I think it was like my first newsletter post was Dharmesh Shah and flash tags. I think this is like such a great ritual. I mean, it had me for weeks thinking about how we give feedback as an organization and like how, if you
mm,
think about like what building a product is, it's part making something and then it's part the feedback loop that comes back, and like
yeah.
how tight can you make those cycles and how efficient and effective can you make those feedback cycles. And so, you know we're talking about noticing. That's something where I've noticed over the course of my career, you get lots of different feedback as a product person. Like I'm a PM trying to build something. Executive comes in, says, "What about this?" And that executive could have really low conviction on the statement that they made, but you don't know that. So it's like,
Mm,
and when you say it like that, it's so simple. But Dharmesh has this thing, flash tags, and it's basically a scale between like how strongly you feel about something. So everything from like an FY to more like, I feel really strongly about this.
mm,
Like he uses a hill dying metaphor, like I'm ready to die on this hill. And so that's like another example that I think that was like the second rituals dinner that we did. Had me thinking a lot about like, okay, how do we as an organization give precision to feedback such that we can have faster feedback loops in our product development cycle? So those are examples. I think,
mm.
you asked about like the first times that we thought about branding this and thinking more about it, that really kind of like tuned me into the power of, codifying some of these things.
Yeah. I mean, sounds fantastic. And just a couple of days ago, I think I was telling somebody that with respect to the founders for you in the podcast, my core aim was to recreate the sense of how back then we used to have these French literary salons where people just gathered, try to like
Mm,
share their ideas and then try to have a very, very open conversation about what's just going on and
cool.
like try to pick each other's brain. I think to me, those dinner parties that you just spoke about sounded exactly like that, like to the times where you just have people coming in, trying to see, oh, like this worked for us, or what really kicked for you, and then try to have some of the conversations which otherwise don't come out because people, especially in tech, I think there's a broader feeling of how everything is so busy. Like building products is so
Mm,
hard, it's so challenging, but also keeps us extremely busy with our own purviews of working on things. But this is like a great setting where people come through and then like
mm,
they try to reflect on their own journeys and say, hey, like this is something that we did differently, and it could help others. I mean, like who would have really thought about offer parties? And that's like so cool and really
yeah,
leaves
totally.
people with more room to think, oh, like this company is taking so much effort, and even before I joined. So I think there's a lot of consideration.
Yeah. Where are the French literary parties? I'm so curious. Tell me more about that. They're
Oh yeah.
yeah. Where did?
So like when in the bygone eras, we used to have this concept of salons where people usually
Yeah,
try to come and then like talk about these philosophical ideas, and artists came,
cool.
especially during the Renaissance period. They discuss ideas, they try to see what's the next best thing. to do. And like that's how the concepts and ideas spread along, right? I mean, even before we had printing press, even before we had like propagators of news, this kind of a parlor or a salon concept was very, very wide known in France. And you had so many scientists and philosophers who, even before discovering a lot of these theorems and posits, used to come along and use that as a space to share what they're working on or share just ideas that they think could propagate and help the society on the whole. So I've always thought about that and been excited about that concept. And I feel like with
Mm,
a lot of what internet's potential could be, I mean, like right now we're all connected. It's great. Like you're there and I'm here and we're just on the
mm,
podcast. And I kind of feel that a lot of the virtual world has the power to get through to the same salon concept where we kind of create like a thinking circle where you and I can exchange ideas. 10 people listening to this can pick from that and they can like sort of spread that to another set of people. And it's our humble ways to recreate that concept, but that's exactly what I sensed as a means that we can contribute to getting more people to think better.
mm. I love that. That's super cool. I'm gonna read more about that after this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'll send you more links to it. And I've really been hooked on to that concept. When you explained this whole dinner thing to me, that's exactly how it sounded to me like. And it's kind of
Mm,
nice that people come into this setting and without any air of whatever power or privilege or whatever it takes, but try to be as candid as possible and try to talk about the things that they can also learn from others. And it's like curating your own little grandma book of recipes, right? It's like having your own little set of things that worked for people and things you would love for the world to know. So that's great.
yeah, super cool. Yeah, yeah. That I think that's a good analogy, actually. Yeah, your recipe
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah. So when there's a lot of these creative inputs that you get from people like Dharmesh or other founders that you meet, there's I feel the energy and the learning gets better with collaborative work, like how you find it with other founders and other PMs. It's also the same setting that happens with teams where, they try to find what's the best way to build together and sort of have inputs from everybody around. So how do you think creators or, founders who are building and shipping their ideas out can maximize this collective input from the community? And what are some ways that's worked for you personally and what you've seen with other founders or other builders?
Yeah, I guess two things come to mind. One is I think people tend to follow authenticity, or I guess maybe the way to think about the inverse of this is like nobody wants to be BS'd or sold, or you know what I mean?
Mm,
So I think that
hmm
if I think about community, or like having a community of people around your product, or yourself as a creator, which I know much less about, but I think part of it comes down to, are you being candid and authentic, and can people really understand what you're about? And if they can, like if you think about a brand, like what a brand is this at a company
mm,
scale. And if I were to ask you, what do you think Nike's about? Like 9 out of 10 people will be like, well, they're about athletes, like they celebrate athletes.
hmm
And I think that a big part of engaging a community is just like authentically and over being yourself.
hmm
And it's I think it's like easy to say, but sometimes a little bit hard to do. I think people get pulled in the direction of like what's popular, or like what they think their audience wants, or what a
Yeah.
what a company thinks is hot right now. And so that's one thing. I mean, the other thing I would say, at least in my experience with
mm
community, is being quite open to serendipity. And I think this is like obviously a broader career thing as well.
mm
when you're like curious about others and when you're, when you're noticing, you tend to see a lot of opportunities for serendipity, and I think that like
Right.
in a lot of communities form not because someone had a step-by-step plan of
Mm.
how this community is going to form and develop. It often forms because there's a network of serendipitous connections, right? And then
Right.
when that occurs, something kind of magical happens that like
Mm.
people with shared interests start like exchanging ideas, to your point on salons. And and so I think that, if you're trying to, you know, get engagement or like input from the community, and you have those two
Mm.
things, like you have, a real authenticity and you know what you're about and you're sort of putting it out there. And then, you're open to and encouraging serendipity, then you kind of have the like, I don't know, the it's like the secret sauce or the, at least the start of what's, what can become kind of like a more communal product or, creator
Mm.
experience.
Right. Yeah. And I think this also like roots back to whatever you do, like in terms of building teams or in terms of building products. These 2 points about being authentic and having your own sense of voice and trying to contribute what you really think is uniquely yourself, and trying to also give a little room to serendipity is beyond looking at just your own ideas, but trying to also connect with people like you and people who perhaps are there across, and sometimes you find yourself caching the same idea that you had in your mind in another person who's probably like tweeting it out or who's probably like writing
Yeah.
publicly and sharing that. So those are like those moments of serendipity that helps you connect. And when you explain that, it reminded me of what Rick Rubin writes about being open to observing what's around you, because most times, especially as deep thinkers, we have these filters within ourselves where when we look at something, we try to like strip it down to what we see, but like we pass that down to so many filters that finally what we arrive at it is kind of like a very, very a deep crux. But at times you just need to leave those filters and look at something in with like a very fresh perspective, or like with open eyes, and perhaps the things that you can pick from there or the people that you can meet would be very different from the other likes of it, which is being very analytical or very critical about the way that you're looking at something and you're deciphering what it really means to you. I think it's a good balance to have both. I mean, we definitely spoke about the art of noticing and trying to arrive at a point that is bring a very unique insight, whether it's a customer's insight or whether it's a new idea.
Mm,
But equally important is also like shedding that glasses of getting very critical about it, but looking at it more
mm.
from like a very surface level as well. So yeah, I hear more of a balance that that could help.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, um, definitely. I think like a lot of people who are building in the tech space have been inspired by creative people like Rick Rubin, or in my case, like comedians like Jerry Seinfeld and other
Oh
people.
yeah.
I think Rick Rubin's, the way he talks about seeing things for the first time,
Mm.
being very open, truly listening quite
Mm.
deeply, I think, are, you know, something that everybody, regardless of where you are in your career or life, I think is very, very powerful. I guess one tactical example is like, going through a new user experience and trying to like truly shed everything that you know about the product for 5 minutes. Like you built a bunch of the products, but just try to like shed it and be totally present in like what the new experience is. And you can learn a lot from those.
Yeah. And to me, it sounds like it also takes a certain level of being open to inspiration and having to build a taste, because a lot of people talk about product taste and trying to have a certain opinion on how do you do some things. But to get there, a lot of this depends on being open to those inspirations that we were talking about. So whether it was Seinfeld with the comedy, or Rick Rubin, or so many other musicians and artists and people who are in the creative space, I think somewhere connecting to the point about ego that we spoke there, all of them are very open to inspiration, and all of them are very continuous in their act of building their taste. And somewhere, I think that keeps them going in the journey. And I feel like a lot of us as product people can adopt from that as a mindset.
Yeah, totally agree. I think, at the end of the day, I think a lot of product builders have to remember that they're creating products for other humans. And it sounds quite obvious, but, you know, if you look at some of the most successful creations for humans, they're not in software.
Mm,
They're in like music and art and other things. And so, I think taking inspiration from those creators is oftentimes more original than just taking inspiration from just your industry.
right. Yeah. Can't agree enough. Cool. We've almost come to the end of the episode, and I would love to ask this question because you've always like been talking about rituals, and I already mentioned that I love Coda as a product. So there's these little Coda packs that people often talk about in terms of trying to like superpower the dogs. And now I'm going to like ask you to make a ritual pack. So whatever you've generally enjoyed in the ritual space, it could be for teams, it could be for self, for growth, however it is, what are the top rituals that come to your mind, like something that you would like to string together and make like a little ritual pack? I mean, you can
Hmm.
walk us through, what you think as the best that's worked for you, or generally the ones that you really enjoy sharing with people.
Yeah, it's a hard question because there are so many that that I think are integral to the success of our organization and other and our customers especially. I mean, I think that there's a couple that come to mind, at least for Coda. Maybe I'll start with one is the way that we handle meetings. And
Mm,
so, yeah, I guess this is inspired by Amazon's six-pager ritual. It's something that we call two-way write-ups or decision
mm,
docs. But the basic idea is write your point very clearly in prose. I think this came out of Jeff Bezos' famous memo that said, inside of Amazon, there's no more PowerPoint. We're not going to like go through slides and take, an hour to go through slides only to have the discussion at the very end. We're going to like have everyone document their view of a certain, big decision or direction or plan or whatever
mm,
as clearly and as efficiently as possible through prose. And then we're going to have like the discussion or the decision. And in our case, we kind of modified that in a few ways. One is we very simply have a little done reading button at the bottom of these. And so
mm,
I find, one friction point I always had when I was a PM at YouTube and Google was just
mm.
figuring out who the hell had read the thing. Like, if I got to get 50 people to agree on this thing and I know that two people have read it, that's helpful
Mm,
input
mm,
versus if like this has been passed around and I
mm,
understand that everybody's read it. The second thing that we do is try to pull out the question. So if you've ever like led a meeting and you're sitting in a Google Doc, you have like
mm,
this whole rail of comments and questions, and people are, commenting on the grammar, and they're also asking a big question around whether the product or the project should ship, and like those are
mm.
just like apples and oranges. And so them being in the same space, I think can be pretty unhelpful as you're trying to like facilitate a decision. And so
Yeah.
we we pulled those out into questions in a table called Dory, which is named after the fish in Finding Nemo. And the basic idea behind having those in a table is now we can upvote it. We can have
Mm,
everybody in that meeting, 20 different people tell us what we should address
mm,
first versus like me having to guess. And so I
mm,
think that That has just been an insanely useful small ritual over the years to get to
Right.
the most important question fast, which, at the end of the day, the alternate the alternative is very frustrating when you feel like you've left a meeting and like you didn't answer the most important question, or like there's a
Mm,
lingering question that's going to block the pace or the
mm,
delivery to a customer. I mean, that is like incredibly frustrating as someone who, is trying to
mm,
ship something or trying to get something out to customers. And then I think the last thing that we do there that I think is very helpful is at Google and YouTube. I always noticed this: people would have these big comment threads like on the title or the last word of the doc. And it was like what they thought about the overall proposal. And it was just such a crappy place to have that kind of rigorous
mm,
discussion or like lay out how you feel about the overall decision. And so we have something at the end of these docs that we call Pulse. And the basic idea is like, okay, step back from all the details and just tell us how you think about this overall decision, this overall plan, this overall proposal. And it
mm,
turns out that when you ask people, everybody in the room, instead of just hearing from the highest paid person or the loudest, you get really good perspective. And that has been proved out, I mean, thousands of times
mm,
in at least the last, few years for me. In one particular example, I wrote a proposal that I thought was going to like sail through, and like one of our lead designers basically said like, I don't think we should do this. And this person happens to be really quiet. And I don't think I would have heard that if we had had a typical meeting format. And so
yeah.
I think that those, that's like one example of a
Mm,
small take a meeting into a slightly different form, sort of back to Gusto example, and taking something that was
mm,
like, you can do the status quo, or you can have a little bit of intentionality and do a lot better.
mm,
That's an example that comes to mind. I think the other thing that comes to mind is, you know, teams are often, at least what I hear from a lot of our customers, and prior to them becoming Coda customers, is I've got like 10 tabs to try to get one thing done. And this feels untenable. I know it feels
mm,
untenable, but I can't exactly put my finger on which part of it is untenable. And I can't exactly see the path to, this not being the case. Like, we do need this tool, we do need this tool, we do need this tool. And so I think the thing that we often see teams first adopting is what's generally we call a team hub. And that is just starting to gather the stuff and put it all in
mm,
like one place. It's like a page for your, the roster of who's on the team, a page for your mission, a page for your notes, a page for, your tasks. And obviously you can bring in, everything, 600 different services, Jira, et cetera. But the
mm,
act of being a little bit more intentional about how the team experiences the artifact, I think, goes a really long way as a leader, because you're no longer kind of subject to the whims of like what someone's going to pull up in their browser every day. You know that they're going to be in like one place. And so
mm,
that's like probably the most common thing that we hear from product
yeah.
teams, is just I can kind of centralize a few of these things that were typically disparate. Now, as a leader, there's a bunch of like little fun, you know, as Bob Ross would say, happy accidents as a part of this,
Mm,
which which are things like, if I want to get your eyes on something new, like a dashboard or something, I can just add a page with a dashboard from Amplitude or somewhere else. And now, like, you're just, back to our point on serendipity, you're just going to encounter that. Like, you're going to go in to look at our meeting notes, and then you're going to say, like, oh, there's a new dashboard page. Like, I'm going to go look at that. And I think the other thing that I've noticed in particular, maybe to add on one other small ritual, a lot of our teams use decision logs, and a lot of our customers now use
mm,
these decision logs where they kind of like record, okay, what are all, like, they may start kind of two different ways to do it. One is they may start a project and say, what are all the key decisions that we need to make, and just list out a bunch of questions. And that has the that has the sort of positive externality of people starting to think, okay, like we can at least get the big questions out there. I don't have to feel anxious about like the fact that we don't know what we're doing here. We're going to answer that question later.
Mm.
And then the other side of that is once you start answering those questions, once you start deciding things and documenting them, as new people join the team, what ends up happening is you kind of just show them here are the big questions, here like how we
Mm.
arrived at these decisions. And I found that that is, in terms of like having good hygiene as a leader, as a product person, that's one of the best things that you can do. And it's like one of the best things that you can incorporate into a team hub because it just, I'm always
Yeah.
interested in things that solve other downstream problems that arise.
Mm.
And so if I can sort of pre-solve the problem of a new person coming into the team and ramping up slow, I would love to sort of pre-solve that, like be proactive in solving that. Or if I can solve, the idea that in 3 months we're going to not remember why we made a certain decision and have
Mm.
a clear documentation of that so that we can, not have to rehash something when a new person comes or when a new manager comes or whatever it is. Those things they're small, they're seemingly small in the moment, and they end up
Yeah.
accumulating into something quite large, which is like your product's velocity, your organization's velocity, things like that. And so I don't know, I could talk for a long time about this topic, but those are a couple that come to mind. Yeah.
Awesome. I love this last part of the episode because it was like really going through a whole movie, but more in a trailer or sort of like a little documentary kind of a thing. It's like, hey, like here's a short film on kind of rituals that you should have for your team. And also if you're a lead, and please listen to this. So I love this version of, fine tuning to just a couple of ones that, people would love to hear. And for me, when I was just, listening to those stories, what was a common thing that threaded all of these was the way people are ready to take that craft to a higher level, get more to the attention to detail, which I think is very easy. People talk about it only from building products front, but it's also a lot to do with people and the journey that you craft for people. So as much as you take effort in getting that differentiated product, trying to like fight it out with your competitor and saying that, oh, like this product is so cool because we put in all the effort into crafting it to a certain way. I think the same thing gets back to how do you make your people feel? Like how do you get the same experience back to yourself and people around you? So all of whatever you were sharing with me, that one point kept coming through, that you should be really passionate about the craft, not just with the product quotient, but also a lot to do with the people and building teams and, being around with people.
Yeah, I think that reminds me of something that Dharmesh says, which is
Mm.
essentially companies create two products. They create an external product that everyone knows, and they
Mm.
create an internal product, and that's called culture, right? And so, like, you have to be as intentional about your internal product, your internal culture, as you do your external product. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And thank you for sharing. Awesome, Lynn. It was so good to have you on the show. I loved the whole dimension that we took with this conversation. Like I kind of liked getting to those sides of you that probably has never been out yet. So, getting to your prior experiences with respect to product and tying back to a lot of what you do today with Coda and also with the other product leads and teams that you meet. So thank you so much for sharing whatever you've learned in your journey. And I can't wait for the listeners to listen to this and share their thoughts as well. So yeah, thanks again.
Thank you. It's been really fun chatting with you. Yeah, always a pleasure.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.